Welcome to the Radically Genuine podcast. I'm Dr. Roger McFillin. Modern psychiatry is a failed experiment. 40 plus years of the chemical imbalance marketing lies. The largest antidepressant trials ever conducted show placebos winning at 6 months. Long-term outcome studies reveal that patients on psychiatric drugs have more episodes, more hospitalizations, more disability, and die earlier than those who come off them. This isn't fringe science. This is the National Institute of Mental Health's own research, and the profession largely ignores it. It's really dark the deeper you get into it. And today's guest spent years inside that system. Dr. Aruna Nammi is board certified in adult psychiatry, geriatric psychiatry, and integrative and holistic medicine. She trained at NIMHANS, the National Institute of Mental Health and Neuroscience in Bangalore, one of the more prestigious psychiatric institutions in the world. She completed a residency and geriatric fellowship here in the US. She's trained in functional medicine and Ayurveda. She's definitely no lightweight. And she has a story here that should disturb every person who has fell into the web of corporate allopathic medicine and the psychiatric medical establishment. Picture this. A pregnant psychiatrist stands in a hospital cafeteria, staring at processed food. And a thought hits her that she can't shake. If this food isn't safe for my baby, why am I feeding it to my psychiatric patients upstairs? And if these drugs aren't something I'd ever give to my own family, why am I prescribing them to strangers? Sounds like the thought of somebody who is thinking ethically, a standard that exceeds law. That question destroyed her career as she knew it. It sent her into research that proved the chemical imbalance theory was always a lie. It revealed that the drugs she'd been prescribing were creating the very imbalances they claimed to fix, something called neuronal perturbation. The brain fights back against these chemicals, and what starts as a treatment becomes a trap, as so many really unfortunately understand. She brought the evidence to her colleagues, published studies, and IMH data. They accused her of taking kickbacks from supplement companies. When she started recommending elimination diets and fish oil alongside these drugs, her medical director pulled her aside on her last day and said, "Be careful with what you're doing. It would be sad for Wisconsin to lose a psychiatrist like you." She heard the threat. She quit anyway. She founded Trinergy Health in Wisconsin and created something called Psychiatry 2.0, a root cause approach that combines functional medicine with 5,000-year-old Ayurvedic wisdom. She's now reversing conditions that mainstream psychiatry labels chronic and incurable: schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, treatment-resistant depression, OCD. She's helping people safely taper off the drugs they were told they needed for life. The psychiatric establishment says she's dangerous. Her patients say she gave them their lives back. This is a psychiatrist who looked at the evidence, looked at her profession, and chose her patients over her career. Dr. Aruna Nammi, welcome to the Radically Genuine podcast.
Thank you so much, Roger. Actually, I'm feeling a little emotional, hearing my life story. This has been a journey for the last 10 years. And you hit all the high points. I won't call them the low points. They were actually the high points. And thank you. Thank you for, putting it so succinctly. And it has moved me to hear my own journey being, described that way. And I can tell you this much, two things that came to my mind. One is that I have absolutely no regrets. In fact, I feel blessed and honored to be here. And the second thing is that I want to play the devil's advocate on behalf of other psychiatrists, my colleagues, not the administration and the people that are in the management, including physicians that end up in management, not them, but everyday physicians and psychiatrists who are, trying to do the best. What I do want our listeners today to know is that most physicians go into this profession with the right desire, with the desire to help and heal. but the system really sucks our life and our soul out of it. And I say this because my first epiphany happened in my very first year of psychiatric residency when I was still in NIMHANS. So I was barely into my psychiatric training, learning about psychosis, reading Kaplan and Sadek, the textbook of psychiatry, and studying about schizophrenia, the chemical imbalance theories, the medications, how limited they are. And there was a movie that was released in India, in South India. Bangalore is in South India. That was in my regional language, Telugu. And it was a biopic of a saint who lived in the 15th century in India. And this saint is regarded as having promoted or actually written a treatise on the South Indian musical tradition, the Carnatic music. And he's credited with having composed about 24,000 songs, out of which 14,000 survive today. And any student in Carnatic musical tradition learns this saint's songs and the tradition and all that. But in this movie, what I noticed was that this saint actually had a spiritual experience. But as a psychiatrically trained mind, as I was watching the movie, and it was a very impactful movie, I come back, I actually remember sitting with my Kaplan and Sadek reading something, and I thought, oh, poor dude, he had a psychotic episode, and he suffered for it. If only he had antipsychotics, right? But immediately the thought came, would he still have been such a great composer of music and songs? And he went on to be married, he went on to have kids, and his lineage still exists in South India today. And he was a great saint, he was a social reformer, he was a philosopher, he was a great husband, father, grandfather, contributed to community. So that thought came up. But in the busyness of life, I squashed it. I was like, that's too much for me to handle at this point in time. Let me just I didn't even think about this consciously. But it was only when repeatedly it seemed like the universe was knocking on my door. And of course, it took my second pregnancy. Even in my first pregnancy, I was still a resident. And I would have 36-hour calls. I would pack my breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and wouldn't pack my breakfast most of the times, but I would go hungry as a pregnant woman until I came home at 2:00 to find I wouldn't eat in any fast food. I wouldn't eat in any of the hospital cafeterias. But the connection I made only with my second pregnancy, because I was a little bit settled. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, some of my needs were being taken care of. And that allowed me to pause and think about these questions. And as like playing the devil's advocate for my colleagues, I want to say that the system keeps them in so much of a hustle and bustle, not allowing them to think, pause, and reflect on these things. And when they do, I went through it. If I quit my job, or I would have been fired. The witch hunt for 3 months was horrible. Then I had a position with the Medical College of Wisconsin as an assistant professor. By 2019, they fired me from that, although it was a very passive position. The chairperson of the Department of Psychiatry had a meeting with me and told me that I was doing something that they did not understand, and they don't know what it is that I'm doing, and so they couldn't associate the institution with me. So this was the kind of so it really becomes difficult for an average physician to step out of the system. But anyway, those were just a couple of things that came to mind.
Yeah, I'm curious to know a little bit more about what you were doing that they struggle to understand.
Oh boy, simple. I began to be very careful about prescribing medications willy-nilly. That did not become the first step. So one incident happened. There was a young woman. She was 18 years old. She presented she was hospitalized to the hospital, and she was assigned to my care. She had come in with depression and suicidal ideation. And I reviewed her history. She had actually been hospitalized at one of the other locations of this hospital system within the same city in Milwaukee a year or two prior, where she was diagnosed with bipolar. She was prescribed Lamictal and an antidepressant. And within a few days, she ended up having a plastic crisis, which can happen with Lamictal and some of these mood stabilizer medications that we use in psychiatry. Basically, her bone marrow shut down and her immune system attacked red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. She would have died. And so she was immediately shipped off to a medical facility because many psychiatric hospitals are freestanding psychiatric facilities. She was hospitalized in the ICU for 4 or 5 days, given blood transfusions, a platelet transfusion, all of those things. And then she really got scared. She refused to come back to the psychiatric hospital and she went away. And the analysis was that, and it became clear to me, Lamictal can cause this. But the investigation ended there. So when she comes back a year later with depression and suicidal ideation, I'm thinking, oh, she had such a severe reaction. What are the kinds of people? I need to look at methylation gene polymorphisms. And she was actually having the MTHFR gene polymorphism, possibly homozygous, meaning both her genes were defective. So I paused. I didn't want to put her on any psychiatric medication, given that she almost died. And then I started to talk to her, and it was actually a crisis. She came from a very conservative Catholic background, went to Catholic schools. And when she was a teenager, her older brother came out as gay, and she became the butt of jokes in her Catholic middle school and high school. And parents were struggling with brother coming out as gay. So this was the psychosocial context that made her feel disconnected from her friends, from the school, even from her parents, didn't know how she had to be with her brother. So in all of this, she ended up feeling depressed, and which eventually became suicidal ideation. So I hospitalized her, did not put on any medication, had daily sessions with her, spoke to her family, and discharged her to an outpatient psychiatrist who I knew was more holistic in nature, and I explained to him all of this. Everything was going well. But somehow the management picked up that case and said that I wasn't practicing standard of care because she had come in with suicidal ideation and I did not discharge her with an antidepressant. And that became a big case that they were, so they did the usual medical review and, reprimanding me and, all of that. And actually they said that the outpatient psychiatrist in the community was outraged by my substandard practice, and he had reported to the management, which was a lie because the outpatient psychiatrist was my friend. I went to residency with him. So I'm calling him up. This was on March 8th of 2016. I remember very well. I'm calling him up at 9:00 in the night. I'm like, hey, dude, if you had a problem with me, why didn't you tell me? And he's like, whoa, this is not coming from me. Send me all the emails you're getting from your management. And he saw, I didn't even have because I was in that stress situation. And he looked at it and he showed me the chain. Like, look, this person has something against you. And look at the chain. These are the people in the management who don't like you anymore. And then he said, why are you so afraid? Get out and start your practice. So literally that's how I started my practice.
That's a fascinating story. It's interesting because you're trying to practice sound ethical medicine and you have corporate medicine, which is pushing you to be a drug dealer, which is what has happened in Western societies, is that it's nothing
Correct.
more than being a drug dealer. It doesn't matter if it's medicinal. It doesn't matter about the potential harms. You're pushing as many drugs as possible. It's so outrageous to hear stories like this, but unfortunately, many of the doctors are just going to comply because of the economic aspect of this. I mean, the amount of money that is spent to go to medical school and then the years in residency and so forth, it puts you in this almost impossible position that you have to many have to dig themselves out of debt. And so they require working according to that system. Now, I'm interested more about then a little bit about your culture, your history, Ayurvedic wisdom. From what I understand and just reading about your story or listening to your story, that you grew up in India, you trained in Western medicine, and you initially dismissed Ayurveda as unscientific. What changed? Because what opened your eyes to this 5,000-year-old system?
So growing up in India, so I was born in mid-70s, so post-colonial India, we were still coming out of our colonial identity that was imposed on us. And the British, their 250-year rule over India, they actually destroyed Ayurvedic institutions. They would actually attack Ayurvedic physicians. They would corner them and they would chop off their hands so as to not practice Ayurvedic medicine. So there's a lot of atrocities happened, and Ayurveda then survived under the auspices of certain independent kingdoms. So Kerala, the kingdom of Kerala was independent from British, so Ayurveda survived there. In other different pockets of India, it survived when the ruling king was not under the British rule. It also, but some very, forward thinkers, philosophers, actually Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is one of them. He actually came to the US in the 1940s with the intention of starting an Ayurvedic institute, and kind of, because truth and knowledge will always survive. And so Ayurveda went into this kind of almost like into a hiding. But with our independence, the government of India actually started to resurrect Ayurvedic medicine, gave it a more modern spin to it. Many Ayurvedic institutes were being built, and a curriculum was created to make it more on par with modern medicine. But I wasn't. But when I was growing up in India, I was still under the colonial impression that Ayurveda is unscientific, modern medicine is scientific. So then, for me, the natural path, and I went to a convent education, which was very much, it was a Catholic school. In fact, my grandparents would not allow me to speak in my native language at home because I needed to learn to speak in English. So there were a lot of these kinds of subtle things that the colonial impact lasted for a few generations. And I grew up in that post-colonial thing. And so Ayurveda survived in families where this lineage had been established, and in cities and states where the kingdoms were independent of the British rule. But when I came here, and so I was, by then I had my 2 kids, and some of these epiphanies were happening. And I started to look at PubMed and Google, looking at the connection between diet and mental health, would come across certain studies, but I didn't really have a framework as to how I needed to unlearn what I learned and, where to go. And I went for a conference, psychiatry conference, in 2013 of May, which was my last psychiatry APA conference. And in that conference, there was a group of psychiatrists. They were calling themselves integrative and holistic psychiatrists. And at that time, I thought they were integrating psychopharmacology with psychotherapy. That is what I thought integrative and holistic meant. But then I started to hang out with them and saw what they were talking about, and I was intrigued. And one of them, she became a good friend, Dr. Sharma. She then told me, hey, if you're interested, you should come to ABIHM, which was it's the American Board of Integrative and Holistic Medicine conference that was happening in October 2013. So May 2013 was my last APA. October 2013 was my first holistic medicine conference, and I haven't stopped going to these conferences. ABIHM is more like a mixed bag. It gave me an introduction to so many different, like Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, functional medicine, homeopathic medicine, naturopathic medicine. So we got a really good introduction, and people were encouraged to choose and explore the paths that spoke to us. For me, that was functional medicine and Ayurveda. So I decided to go along both of these tracks, and I studied Ayurveda with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's Institute, Maharishi Institute in Fairfield. And I also started attending functional medicine conferences. So on the one hand, I started to understand Ayurvedic medicine in the way that it was written by sages 5,000, 7,000 years ago. But on the other hand, functional medicine gave me the modern language, the modern tools that we could use. And it seemed like a perfect synergy for me. So that's how it came about. But I should say that my training, like my degree in India, was actually called neuropsychiatry. And it was drilled upon me. Like India, I mean, my medical education as well as my psychiatric education was more holistic. It was mind and body together. And in my institute, when I was a resident back in 1999 to 2002, they were actually doing research studies looking at effect of yoga practices. Like there's one called Sudarshan Kriya Yoga, and that actually has been shown to be comparable to amitriptyline for mild to moderate depression. And I remember looking at all of this, and the studies were happening. Like the other resident who was the principal investigator in that study, she was. I remember this conversation with her, and I was like, "How can that be? How can yoga and breathing really do that?" And that was because that's my ignorance that made me, shed things down, and that happened. So having an open mind is very, very. I mean, that's one of the things. Like understand it only when we develop experiential wisdom, embodied wisdom. So knowledge first, it's just facts and figures, but then when we experience it and when it becomes embodied wisdom, that's when the truth of that knowledge actually becomes more apparent to us.
So for the listeners who haven't been exposed to Ayurveda yet, how would you compare and contrast this Ayurvedic and functional medicine approach to what is typical allopathic medicine in the Western world?
Oh boy, there are many, many key differences. First of all, Ayurvedic medicine and functional medicine, and almost all holistic medicine, from chiropractic, naturopathic, everything, they have this inherent understanding that the soul is primary. In Ayurveda, we call it energy and prana. In Chinese medicine, we call it qi. And naturopathic, I think in chiropractic and naturopathic medicine, we call it the vital force or the vitality. What all of this refers is that there is an entity beyond mind, body, and the brain that is actually orchestrating all of the functions. I mean, how does a single celled zygote become a human baby? I mean, look, if you just pay attention to some of these, like how does, if you eat a banana, let's say you and I, we share a banana. That banana, when I eat, it's going to become me. It's not going to remain a banana in my body. It's not going to become you. But the same banana you're eating, it's going to become you. It's not going to become me. So what is that intelligence in us that is able to do that? So these were some of the, so that's the first thing, that there is an inner intelligence. It's all knowing. It has all the answers. And it is that intelligence that governs all life processes. This is common to all holistic medicine traditions. And it is based on quantum physics, actually. Whereas in modern medicine, it's actually based on matter being primary. And it's based on Newtonian physics. That is the fundamental flaw with modern medicine. And because there is no understanding, there is this inherent intelligence, a self-governing intelligence. Of course, they talk about homeostasis, but they don't. And I think that homeostasis is happening because of the chemicals. Let's say your blood pH is going up, and then they say that, because of the process of homeostasis, your blood pH is automatically coming down. No. What is that entity that is actually looking at, blood pH is going up. I need to come up with some compensation. It's the same intelligence when somebody is taking an antidepressant is saying, this is not actually right for me. I need to compensate for it. So it is that intelligence that is operating day in and day out. And in Ayurvedic medicine and almost all traditional holistic forms of medicine, including shamanism and all of these different varieties that we have, they all work to enliven that intelligence, to get us in connection with that intelligence. So it is true empowerment. It's about going in. Whereas here in modern medicine, it is about disempowerment. You don't know anything. I am the doctor here. I am the hospital. I am the insurance company. Here, do as I say, and you're going to be fine.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a fascinating debate between Dr. Adam Urado and a psychiatry resident, Dr. Robert Chen, on SSRIs during pregnancy. Dr. Urado's being a maternal fetal medicine physician, one of the foremost experts on SSRIs and its harms to fetal development. But I posed them the question, why do people get depressed? And I thought that was fundamental, because if you're ever going to provide informed consent and you're going to try to intervene in some way, the formulation matters. And in psychiatry, Dr. Chen answered this question from this materialist Newtonian physics perspective. And he couldn't answer it because he says multifactorial, which doesn't mean anything to a patient. And he can't really articulate in any way about the human spirit, the human condition, the challenges, the idea that there is a soul that is experiencing life through this human body, and it's painful, and we're in a lower dimensional field, and there's all these challenges. He can't discuss human emotional state because he hasn't been trained that way. So let me ask you, as a psychiatrist, why do people get depressed?
I will start by saying that it is multifactorial. For me, depression is really a disconnection syndrome. It's a cry for help from our soul, not just the mind, not just the body. It's actually coming from a soul. And it's a disconnection syndrome where the person is actually disconnected from their soul. We are disconnected from rhythms of nature. We are disconnected from each other. We are disconnected from community. So depression is really a disconnection syndrome. That's a psycho-spiritual way of understanding. The Ayurvedic understanding would be that any disease happens. In Ayurveda, actually, they say that the fundamental root cause of any disease is low self-worth. That's it. And they put it in a spiritual way. And so that low self-worth arises when you feel disconnected from the whole. We are part of this cosmos. But when we are made to feel that you are alone, you are nobody, there is no meaning to who you are, that gives rise to such discomfort that it can give rise to not just depression, but cancer, to everything else and everything in between.
So
that's the Ayurvedic understanding.
So
functional medicine
can I jump in there real quick? So it seems like what you're saying is a root cause of disease is around disconnection, or in other words, are out of alignment or out of balance. And that could be all of nature. So when it is multifactorial, what we're really saying is there are many different causes. I guess somebody could be putting poisons into their body, of course, and be out of balance, and that'd be a root cause of disease. But also they can be off their soul's path, that they're living a life that they're not designed to live, and that is painful. And that pain is designed for ultimate transformation, really to return you back to why you're actually here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So from that lens, I completely am in agreement with the way that you have described it. Yes. I mean, every disease, not just depression, every disease is really an opportunity for growth and transformation. These obstacles, they're not really, I mean, Dr. Joe Dispenza actually says this, that every impossible situation, every great possibility comes disguised as an impossible circumstance or situation. So these are possibilities for us to become larger than human. It's actually all of these crises that happen in our life are here to make us transcend our human limitations, which is becoming divine or more like the creator. That is the purpose that every single one of us is on that life path. But to make it easy for everyone, I mean, in terms of even education, what I've come to teach is that all diseases have only 3 root causes. Diet and lifestyle is number 1, trauma is number 2, and toxins is number 3. So this is kind of a framework that I've come, and it helps me to not miss any of them, any of these root causes. And in practically in experience, I do find that all these 3 verticals are in some way impacted for a given patient. One more than the others, but we have to consider all of this. And fundamentally, that disconnection and low self-worth. Because whether it is we are choosing to eat junk food, that can only come when we don't value our own self enough to do right by us.
From what I understand is that you had a colleague who mocked you on the Ayurvedic understanding of mental illness. Well, I think it's called Buddha Vidya. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah. Bhuta Vidya. Yeah.
Bhuta Vidya. So what does that actually refer to? And what does it reveal about the understanding of psychiatric conditions? How would you respond to that colleague who mocked you as if you were setting psychiatry back to the dark ages and it's meaning that there's some possession by demons?
Yes. And all of this, I mean, so much of it, when people, even a lot of Indian physicians actually criticize Ayurveda, and they're all coming from a place of ignorance. None of them have actually tried to understand Ayurveda in its original language, which is in Sanskrit, try to understand what is the actual meaning of those Sanskrit words, but they take the colloquial meaning of it. So in this example, can you imagine that 5,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago when Ayurveda was actually written down, it had 8 disciplines and psychiatry was one of them. Modern psychiatry is barely 100 plus years old, but the sages who wrote down this had the wherewithal to even think about mind and the spirit as an entity and even recognize like psychosis, depression, OCD, and many different forms of meditation. All of these things have been very clearly written down in psychiatry, in Ayurvedic psychiatry. Now, they called it Bhuta Vidya because the understanding was that that psychiatry really referred, psychiatric illnesses are illnesses of the software of the body. So for this, we have to go into the Ayurvedic understanding of creation and life. And it is very much similar to the Big Bang. They do say that, at first, there was the Big Bang, which is the sound, then came light and, all of these things. But the way in Ayurveda it is described is that first it was space was created, then air, then the element of fire, then water and earth. These are called Pancha Mahabhutas. Pancha means 5, Maha means great, Bhuta means elements. So it really refers to the 5 great cosmic elements that first came into creation with the Big Bang. And so that word Bhuta refers to this subtle energy. So when the Big Bang happened, matter was nowhere around because it was still just energy. There was a whole mass of energy that was vibrating at very, very high frequency. But as that energy cooled down and that vibration came down, the frequency came down, it condensed into matter. And that's how creation came into existence according to Ayurveda, which if you see is very, very similar to modern quantum physics descriptions of the origin of universe. But the Bhuta refers to the subtle energetic element, which still exists in our bodies. Those 5 Panchamahabhutas organized into 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. We are still in the realm of energy here. But Vata, Pitta, and Kapha then give rise to all the organs, all the cells, and the tissues. And in Ayurvedic medicine, when we talk about psychiatric illnesses, we are really saying that it's a problem with the software. Yes, we have to still heal the hardware, but you have to understand that it is a software problem. But over thousands of years of Indian culture, the word Bhuta came to be, it basically refers to subtle forms of energy that is not immediately visible with our 5 senses. And those subtle forms of energy, and there's always polarity in this realm. There's good and there is bad. And the word Bhuta came to be associated with bad energies or bad energetic entities like devils and demons and ghosts and spirits. And so this is the dilution of the language and the meaning into colloquial language that has happened. And so one of the understanding of especially psychiatric illnesses, psychosis, was that maybe it was a devil possession or spirit possession. That became the colloquial understanding. So this colleague of mine, when I announced way back in 2016, 2017 that I'm practicing Ayurvedic psychiatry, he was a physician colleague from my medical school days. He said, oh, now you're taking, you'll be exercising demons and all that. But little does he know, he's not a psychiatrist. I think he's some other branch of medicine. Nimhans actually did a study in 2001 where they compared outcomes for psychosis with antipsychotics versus temple healing. So many from villages, when the first choice for many villages in India is to seek temple healing, where the patient is taken to a particular temple that is recognized as having these energetic healing properties. This patient with psychosis stays there in the temple grounds, participates in the temple activities, And it is understood that the energy of the temple actually heals the patient from psychosis. And the very interesting thing is that temple healing is better than antipsychotics at the end of 4 to 6 weeks without side effects.
So it does beg the question about energies. Okay. And so maybe this gets into
Yes.
some controversial topics because it's non-materialist, it's non-secularist, it certainly brings us down a path to understand our nature of reality from a different perspective. So let's talk about the term dark energies, lower energy fields, things of that nature. I've spoken to lots of people privately and continue to expose myself to varying perspectives and people's experience on this plane that are outside what are normal and typical. And there are many people, even trained physicians, who will tell me privately, yes, there is this energetic possession. They may not use the word demon, for example, but they might use words like darker energies. They might talk about spiritual force. Is that something that you consider?
So I've given this, I mean, yes, because and because of the way that I was practicing, I've actually had, especially Catholic patients with psychosis, their families have taken their family member for exorcisms here in the US. And those families actually have reported to me that their patient has gotten better. I can think of at least 2 or 3 patients that this has happened. And it's because, of course, these patients felt, and I think it happens much more, but maybe many patients and their families are not comfortable talking about it. They were receiving treatment from me in whatever way I was doing, but they also sought these other things. And their belief system tells them that it's the exorcism that helped their patient. And who am I to deny that? But for my own personal understanding, and as my own, I meditate, I do a lot of spiritual rituals myself. And what I've come to understand is that ultimately everything comes from one source, one creator. It's because we are in this earth realm, which is the realm of polarity, we have split even that source energy into light and dark. And the dark energy can take any of its manifestations. But for me, the simplest way to understand any dark energy is that it is a survival energy. It's the stress hormones, adrenaline, sympathetic, selfish, self-centered, all of those, narcissistic. I mean, you could call any of these terms. But from the simplest way that I've understood for myself is that it's simply a survival energy, because whoever is manifesting those dark energies is still somebody that is still a manifestation of the creator, of the ultimate source, ultimate truth. And for me, when I look at it in that way, my job then becomes is to enhance my own light, because that's the only way you dispel darkness, is by shedding light. And in treatment, if I'm working with somebody who is narcissistic or who is feeling that they are in that narcissistic relationship, or I'm bringing up narcissism because that is usually kind of talked about in this dark energies also, but I'm not going too much into that demon possession and things like that. Or maybe, I would extend my thinking even to those states as well, that we can still help a person get in touch with their light and overcome the darkness within. Whether we do that with nutrition, whether we do that with some of these energy enhancing rituals, whether you do that with chanting, with or exorcism rituals, or it could be simply enhancing the self-worth and self-respect that a person can have for themselves. These are all this, and most, how can I forget this? It's actually creating love. And the medium of the therapeutic relationship, loving, positive regard given unconditionally, can be the light that can overcome the darkness. And that's why I love Harry Potter movies. The Dementors, that's the darkness. Mm-hmm. And I think it's The Prisoner of Azkaban, where Harry Potter is thinking, the Dementors are sucking the life out of him, as well as Sirius Black. And he thinks that he's seeing his parents and they're going to save him and Sirius Black, but then it turns out that it's him So he has to reach within to find his lightness, because only his light can dispel the darkness.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation recently with a gentleman who said your protection against the dark is love as an energy. That darkness
Yes.
harvests fear. They can attach to humans. They can attempt to allow humans to create in ways that serve that darkness and harvest fear. And we see that light versus dark as a spiritual battle here on earth. My question is, what do you know about the shift in consciousness on the planet Earth, this evolutionary shift that we may be going through? I don't know if you've heard of this shifting to five-dimensional consciousness, a unity consciousness. I think that this is something that's probably quite critical for our time and the next few years and decades
Yes.
ahead. I want to get your thoughts on it.
Yes, I think the first time I heard about this was when I read Charles Essenstein's essay. I think it's called the Age of Awakening or something like that. But then for me, I read literature from all different sources, but my fallback has always been the scriptures in the Hindu tradition and the million gods and goddesses that we have. And so from that perspective, actually, I've been thinking about penning an article about this on my Substack as well. So the chaos that we are seeing right now, we are actually coming out of the age of darkness. There is no question about that. And what coming out of the age of darkness really means is the union of polarities. In Hindu tradition, we call it as Shiva and Shakti. Shiva is the witness consciousness. Shakti is the moving energy. Shiva is the masculine principle, the yang. Shakti is the feminine principle, and the creative principle. And the time has been divided in the Hindu tradition into four big yugas or epochs. The first one was a Satyuga, where it's the age of truth and light. Everything was perfect. Shiva and Shakti were in union. Then comes the Treta Yuga. In Treta Yuga, a little bit of corruption has already started. So there is the separation of Shiva and Shakti. And we see that in the great stories, in the Ramayana, we see there is a suppression of the feminine principle a little bit. Then comes Dwapara Yuga, and Krishna is the god of Dwapara Yuga. There is even more suppression of the feminine principle, and patriarchy and this toxic masculinity begins to rear its head. And then we come to the dark ages, which is the Kali Yuga, which is where we are in the upswing of Kali Yuga. So we are definitely seeing that. And in Kali Yuga, no wonder Delhi became the rape capital of the world at one point in time. That is the absolute suppression and oppression and torture of the feminine principle. But we rise from that, and we rise through destruction. So the Me Too movement and all of these things that have happened in our recent cultural memory, that is all the destructive principle of the feminine energy of Shakti, which is symbolically known as the Kali, the destroyer. She is rising up, but then once Kali comes up, it creates the void. And then from the void again, truth and life and goodness and all of that awakens and is nurtured, and we move to a higher plane of existence and experience, where by nature, that is of the union of the polarities, Shiva and Shakti union. And when that happens, it does give rise to that unity consciousness. And the way for every individual, so this has to happen at the collective level, but it can only happen at the collective level when we do it at the individual level. And it is so when Shakti is suppressed, she's at the base of the spine. She's only in the survival centers, the lower three energy centers. I'm going a little bit into we have the 7 chakras, actually 8 chakras. The lower 3 are to do with survival. And when Shakti gets suppressed there, we go into that adrenaline charged sympathetic survival mode. But through meditation, through intention, when we move that energy first into the heart center, which is where the first union of polarities happens in our heart center, love is generated. And this love is first for us and then for everybody else. When that happens, then that energy, that potent love energy then rises up through the 7th chakra, through the 8th chakra, which is the door to the divine consciousness, which is just a witness consciousness. In fact, in the Hindu tradition, they say that Shiva without Shakti is Shava. Shava means corpse. So Shiva is nothing without Shakti. And when there is that polarity, that's what creates the chaos. So when each individual person is paying attention to their own energies and devoting time to raise their consciousness and awareness first into their heart center and then above, that is what will take us into the fifth dimension. And so those of us who commit to this practice one way or the other, and of course, this is just one of the pathways that has been described. Another pathway could be really practicing that love for yourself and for every living creature. Practicing non-violence in thought, in word, and in deed as much as possible. That also will take us to the fifth dimension. So, I mean, there's no one pathway.
Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Christian perspective of this. There's the Psalms verse that says, "Be still and know that I am God." And I had my own spiritual awakenings that moved me towards meditation and really learning to quiet my mind. And in that, I have received messages. And of course, I've also surrendered to the flow of God in life to allow myself to meet others who are in a similar path, and similar things are being experienced on their end. So it's not out of the ordinary for me to hear what you just said from your perspective and from your faith background, because I'm hearing similar things when my mind is quiet, is that we are undergoing a shift from 3-dimensional reality to a 5-dimensional reality, one that is of unity consciousness. And in that is a shift of the darkness towards light, towards love, the interconnectedness of all things. And what I believe is going to happen is we are going to see widespread disruption and some chaos as we undergo this shift, as our physical bodies are adapting to this new energy that exists on the planet. And I think it's going to interface with the medical system, and the medical system is going to label these as psychiatric conditions when there are energy shifts that are undergoing. And so it's going to be on us who are aware of this to be able to educate people across the planet on how best to manage this energy. And we are in a state of drift where so many people are hooked onto devices and social media and media. They're under constant distraction that they can't even sit in silence and be with themselves. And so some of the messages that have come to me, which I'm learning as I receive them, is the shift from masculine to divine mother, divine feminine energy. That in this previous state, this 3-dimensional world that we're in, there's an imbalance of masculine energy and a movement towards the divine mother, the divine feminine, where there's a nurturing, loving energy that is more feminine, which seeks out a balance. And then once we are able to, as each individual is goes into meditation, is actually able to practice love, which is also the message of Jesus Christ, love and forgiveness, and uses that energy and lifts the energy individually, it is going to be assumed by the collective in that shift, but we're going to go through a period of time of great disruption. And so my question to you is, how do we even begin to educate people on what this might look like or be experienced? So I'm going to tell some personal stories here. For example, when I experienced this unity consciousness in the depths of meditation, it felt euphoric. And I have also been in contact with other people who just the development of those relationships have led to like what I call an energy upgrade, and various spiritual practices that I have learned and engaged in have led to that, which on its surface could look manic. Now, I'm very well trained. There's all aspects of my life regarding my physical health, my spiritual meditative prayer practice, relationships, And my understanding as a clinical psychologist allows me to be able to manage what is internally happening to me. But when this happens to other people and they interface with the medical system, they say things like you're having a religious delusion. They say things you're manic, you're bipolar, and then they're trying to drug this, which is why I view that the psychiatric industrial complex and this medical industrial complex that has become just these drugs, which do disconnect you from the divine, and they disconnect you from each other. It is preventing, or its goal is to prevent that shift on the planet. And there's only so many people I can have this conversation with because I get labeled as like I'm losing my mind. So what are your thoughts on what I just said?
Actually, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, and that was my first epiphany back in 1999 when I saw that movie. Like, I thought, from that psychiatrically trained mind, if I had lived in the time of that saint, I would have diagnosed him with schizophrenia and put him on meds. So, but that was my first. So yes, I mean, psychosis and spirituality are two sides of the same coin. And the way I understand is, so I mean, you brought up a lot of things here. Yes, I mean, there is darkness in the psychiatric industrial complex. There is no question about that. And I don't know where that darkness originated from and what was the intent of the darkness. And I mean, I like to always give the benefit of the doubt. I mean, the scientists who came up with the antipsychotics and the antidepressants, I do like to think that they started off with good intentions, but somewhere things went awry. But what we are seeing is that those medications, they do disconnect us from, actually the mind and the body gets disconnected. The medications disconnect us from the divinity. No doubt about all of that. And that should not be the way to be offered to anybody that is going through a psychosis episode. I don't do that in my practice. In fact, I'd rather give a benzodiazepine. Actually, many supplements can actually help with the insomnia that can happen. It can help with some of the disruptions in the biological function that can happen. We don't have to rely on psychiatric medications. So what can we do? Number one, we have to keep talking about it. We have to educate patients when they come in, systems, organizations, the powers that be. And you're doing your part, more than your part, I would say, Roger, that you're, having these difficult conversations, even at the cost of being, becoming an object of ridicule. And I don't know about you, but I'm going to be hitting 50 next month. And I'm ready to leave all of those behind. I mean, nothing. I mean, truth to power is what is going to be my mantra for now. And all of these things, to do any of these things, the first thing is that our internal state. So when we are feeling whole on the inside, when our consciousness is in union, which happens with meditation practice, when we are coming from that space, no matter what we say, what we do, it will land where it needs to land, and it will take root and it will sprout. So that much I'm confident about. And so that gives me the courage and the motivation to do what I do every day. I'm guessing it's kind of similar to you as well. But if you were to ask me what are the things that we can actually do, we have to find spaces where we go in and we talk about these things. Even if it feels that it's not going to be received. I think as and when opportunity arises, we have to go, we have to talk, we have to express alternate viewpoints. And we don't have to look too far. Just look at other cultures. I mean, anthropologically, when we look at how the psychotic symptoms were regarded throughout history of mankind, they were always seen as a gift across cultures around the world. They were seen as a spiritual gift. It's only the modern spin and this modern spin, if you look at the collective human memory, this amnesia is only 100, maybe 150 years old. I say this even with regard to dietary choices. Like, people, when they tell me, oh, it's so easy to get junk food and, this is what we've always done. No. This is not what you have always done. Your genes have only faced this only since post-World War II. Before that, people ate locally. They ate fresh, they ate the whole animal. There were no chemicals. They ate a variety of things. They ate seasonally.
Mm-hmm.
So much of it is the propaganda. So much of it is the marketing. So much, I mean, like, we've been told that right is wrong and wrong is right, up is down. I mean, like Orwellian style. And for all of this, I mean, I cannot emphasize the importance of going into the stillness within.
Well said. And it's important to note that the industrial age of the mass poisoning and the lies have a very clear agenda, and that is to create sickness and illness, disconnection, and then dependence on those very systems that they profit from. And this awakening that's occurring right now, even as I speak on this show today, it's just recently there's been more release of the Epstein files, and you see the interconnectedness of all this, positions in power. So many people are under control of this very dark intelligence web to be able to provide what amounts to as an anti-human war, industrial complex, medical complex, all things that interfere with human flourishing. And those transhumanist, anti-human world leaders talk about human beings really as being parasitic, and it's an anti-life agenda. And you see it by everything that they're trying to do to destroy the environment, in the way that they destroy the environment with false ideas, the fake food, the chemical laced food, the pushing of pharmaceuticals, inducing pandemics with biological agents and so forth. I mean, it's really an anti-life agenda. We're waking up to that. I think even 5 years ago, this would be branded conspiracy theory. And what has been branded conspiracy theory in the past is now the light is shining on it and saying, no, this is actually real. This is true. And in the shift to 5D consciousness, one of the things you do learn is that we are creators of our own reality, that we can go inward, raise our vibration, project, create in consciousness, and then manifest out into physical form. And not a lot of people understand what that means. And it's labeled woo-woo, and it doesn't make any sense. And it's also being commercialized today, as many social influencers try to push this idea, I think a false idea of manifestation. But can you explain the idea of being creators of our own reality and the impact of consciousness on matter?
So, I mean, let me speak from my personal experience first, and then I'll take it tied to the health scenario. So, great example, the COVID pandemic. If anybody questions this creation manifestation, that we create our own destiny, the COVID pandemic was a stark example. So for people like you and me who didn't believe in any of this, and for me, the virus did not exist, or even if it did, it was not a threat. So me and my family, we're talking 20 years ago, I had even younger kids. I started off by being afraid. And then once I read the studies and everything, once I realized that something was afoot here, once I changed my internal perception of the threat and did not believe in that, then we've traveled the most. I even went to India when everybody was saying that, oh, they will not allow you there. No, none of the things that happened that others were either afraid of or experiencing was not my reality. So just in terms of the travel piece and even falling sick, I did not fall sick with the virus, but every time I was in a room full of vaccinated people, I did fall sick at that time. That also, I was thinking, okay, because I was more afraid of the shedding and the virus, the vaccine, did I create that for myself? So, maybe, but I really was not afraid of the virus, and I did not actually fall sick with the virus at any point in time. And it did not alter my life in any way. I did not take the vaccine. My family also, they were not vaccinated. And our life continued But for those who believed that they cannot travel, they cannot work, they will not be able to do certain things, or this virus is very deadly, they're going to die, we saw that people, if they believed in the threat and the fear of death was strong, they were dying. So, all things equal.
The mind is very, very
powerful. The mind is powerful.
Yeah.
And now, tying in the health scenario, so when we look at the science of placebo, the placebo research, I think Bernie Siegel was a Yale physician, surgeon who did a lot of work in the placebo field in 60s, 70s, I think well into the 80s. And towards the end of his career, this is what he said. There are no incurable diseases, only incurable patients. So and the way that happens is that it is actually a neurochemical immune pathway that is at play here. So it's neurochemical, neuroendocrine, neuroimmunological pathways that get activated whenever we are in the placebo response. This is what's happening. But in placebo response, what is happening is the thought, the belief, the thought that we accept, believe, and surrender. The thought of healing, if we accept, believe, and surrender, that becomes true for us. The nocebo is the thought that you're going to have a bad outcome. When you accept, believe, and surrender to it, that becomes the reality for us. So, yeah. Does that answer your question? With regard to other forms of manifestation, yes, I mean, there is the use of it, there is the abuse of it. We see that all the time. But, and like with anything, that's why I tell people that it's not about knowledge. It's about experiential wisdom. It's about embodied wisdom. Any knowledge, you have to try it out for yourself and see whether it works for you or not.
It's interesting because the power of our beliefs can be so multi-layered. And if we are not conscious beings, if we do not facilitate the intention to be observers of our experience, then we become reacting automatically to what we've been exposed to in our lives, in our culture, from our upbringing, from what the media places into our subconscious, what we experience in this world. And those beliefs, they become embedded in the collective unconscious, and then we expect all them to manifest itself out in reality. I think one of the best examples of this is the fear of your genetic vulnerabilities, and is pushed by the medical establishment without any founding, without any strong scientific evidence. They push this narrative that you are somehow a victim to your genes. And unless you enter into our system and you try to utilize all our preventative measures, which also creates an unconsciousness, then that disease itself is going to manifest itself. But the truth of the matter is that's creating disease. So we know this from psych neuroimmunology research, is that once you create this idea in consciousness, it is impacting you throughout your bodies, your cells, your DNA, because what's created in consciousness does get manifested that way. That's why I really do encourage people to pull yourself out of the fear provocation of the sick care system. And to the degree that people believe that they have some genetic vulnerability to something because they ancestor down the line, whether that be a heart condition or cancer or alcoholism, they are an active creator in that entire experience. And you see how they live their lives to make that very real, and how that will be impacted, that will be affected in the body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, to give another personal example of this, like, before I went for my first ABIHM conference, I had no idea that you could heal people by changing their diet and detoxifying and, doing some of those things. That was not even in my worldview. I thought chronic fatigue syndrome was chronic. IBS was incurable. Mental illnesses, of course, are incurable. But one experience of attending that conference and listening to some key speakers talk about their experience, I remember I had this very, very clear, and it was a very emotional experience. That's why only when our emotions get engaged in this process. So it's not just affirmation where you're talking, oh, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy. It doesn't work. Only when our body and our emotional body gets engaged in this process, that's when it becomes reality for us. That's the key to creation. Because I remember I saw Dr. Patrick Hanaway present his functional lecture on functional medicine, and he described a patient that he had helped heal from 40 different diagnoses and 20 different diagnoses and 40 different medications that she was prescribed over her lifetime of 40 years. Within 6 months, or within a short amount of time, she was completely healed and off the medications. And that was a typical patient that I was seeing, middle-aged women with IBS, depression, anxiety, and thyroid issues, and relationship issues and all of that. When I saw that, that opened up a possibility for me that if he can do it, I can do it. All I have to do is learn how to do that. And that filled me with so much of enthusiasm and exhilaration. And also there was a knowing. I remember it felt like I had that aha moment. Okay, this is what I was supposed to do. So for anybody, think going down this path of creation, it starts by acquiring new knowledge. You cannot be where you are and think about creating something different. You have to explore, put yourself in situations where you are getting new information. And that new information will then hopefully give you different choices. Like it happened with me. Okay, I thought about, then if I want to do that, if I want to become that kind of a doctor, then I need to get this and this education. Then I learned that, then tried it with my patients, tried it on myself, experienced it. And then when we reach that point, then I've become a different kind of a doctor now. And we can extrapolate this process for almost anything, from sickness to health, from poverty to abundance, to everything. The process remains the same. It's acquiring knowledge, thinking in new ways, making new choices, trying out new actions or new behaviors, then experiencing new things in life, and then seeing whether that truth of that information, whether that becomes true for us. If it becomes true for us, then it's gold. Then we are that. I think that's one way to go about it.
Yeah, well said. In 1954, it was believed that breaking the 4-minute mile in running was impossible. It was a barrier that was impossible to the limitations of human physical exertion. And when Roger Bannister, who was a medical student at that time, when he broke the 4-minute mile barrier, what you saw then is it created a shift in the collective consciousness. And they call this the Bannister effect now, because it was not an immediate flood of runners, but within 46 days, the record was broken again. And then in 2.5 years, 10 runners had achieved the sub 4-minute milestone. And now where it is you see high school students be able to do that, right? So it becomes an idea, a belief that causes limitation. There's a ceiling. And then once we break through that, it changes in the collective. And that's what's important to note about evolution. And that's why I'm so concerned about the limitations of psychiatric disorders by calling them medical conditions or calling them diseases, or the genetic lies, the chemical imbalance lies. All what this does is it creates a consciousness and understanding that limits you and is going to create the disease in itself. So it's important for we as a culture, as a society, that we break through those lies and we communicate in new ways, and we bring that into the collective, which brings me to the final question. You've been so kind to spend so much time with me today, is that you developed a 6-month program called Psychiatry 2.0. If you can walk us through it, like what happens in month 1, month 2, how do you take someone who's been told that they're chronic and incurable, and then you help them reclaim their life?
So I start off by giving them information and showing them what others in my practice have done. I mean, we have to, just like the Bannister effect, we have to create that. And I will say this, Roger, that I don't know if you saw this. NPR did an article last week, in the last week of January, where they're talking about that potentially DSM diagnostic system is going to undergo a serious change, where they're going to be. So you and I, we are the glitch in the matrix, and there are many such glitches. So, so I think yes, there is that awakening, there is the rise in consciousness, and I think we are really living at a wonderful, wonderful time period where we get to witness and be part of this. But coming back to my program, the 6 months, it's actually a systematic and sequential approach to reclaiming health and vitality, both in the body as well as in the mind. In month 1, that's the intake appointment, and that's where, no matter where people are, I start to give them this information. I mean, I lay it off not as a hypothesis but as my truth, that all diseases have only 3 root causes: diet, trauma, and toxins. And then we see how that framework applies to the patient in front of me. Then I do blood work, a complete look at their internal chemistry, how their hormones are doing, their blood sugar, nutritional levels, any toxins in their system, inflammation. All of this, we take a look at it. Then I also do methylation gene analysis. So it's not about genetic, like faulty genes. It's about the interaction between the gene and the environment. And certain genes don't work well in certain kinds of environment. So methylation genes do not work well in a toxic environment. And the value of that test is that we can enhance the environment so that the methylation genes can also work to their optimal capacity. So it's about restoring that internal intracellular physiological functions. So that's the gene test. Then I also look for the more common things: mycotoxins, mole toxins, and there's another test that I like to do, which is called the organic acid test, which really gives me an idea about intracellular physiology. Sometimes when the history indicates, I might go into, whether this is a spike protein issue. So we look at tests that can differentiate between viral spike protein, like in long haul COVID, versus vaccine spike protein. So there are tests now that from Germany, there's a lab that can actually make that differentiation. And we have, you can do that test right here in the US. Other times I might be interested in looking at Lyme and other co-infections, but that is individualized. But at the core, I like to take a look at the intracellular physiology, mold exposure, genetic tests, and inflammation and hormonal markers. And that gives me an idea as to how we can intervene. And intervention is going to be based on functional medicine and Ayurveda, where the focus number 1 is on restoring gut health and healing the body, starting with supplements, but also medical food. Different types of foods are more easily digestible. I mean, to all your listeners, if you're having any chronic disease, you should not be eating salads. Salads require a healthy digestive system. And if any chronic disease indicates that your digestion has already taken a hit, and eating salads will exacerbate that poor digestive process. So we make some little changes like that. And Ayurvedic herbs act at the level of the energy. We talked about the Panchamahabhutas and the Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So when we manipulate energy, matter will follow suit. When we balance energy, matter balances. So that's the benefit of Ayurvedic herbs and medicines. And then in month 2, I start off with the psychotherapy, which is all geared towards self-empowerment and self-worth. So month 1 is all, what happened to you? We talk about what brought you to this point. But from month 2, I give different techniques, including meditation, self-awareness exercises, to really get you to see that you are in charge. And the buck starts and stops with you. No more victim stories. I mean, I'm here, to handhold when people need it, but it only happens between me and the patient, not with, anybody else. And so that radical responsibility becomes a very important aspect that I teach. Slowly patients, and when the body is healthy, when your adrenals are once again able to manage stress, then doing these kinds of psychotherapeutic things also becomes easy. So that's why I don't start off with psychotherapy right away. And 1 month of diet change and supplements is enough for people to feel well in their body, well enough to do the harder work of changing their mind and their behaviors and habits. That takes time. Month 3 and 4, we reserve it for Ayurvedic detox. which is the only detox that is that uses fat as the medium. Because all of our toxins, whether generated by our own body or that we get from environment, I mean, all of the environmental toxins come from petroleum. They're all petrochemicals. Cosmetics, we should be calling them petrocosmetics. And because they're fat, they come from fat, they're fat soluble. Water detoxes, juice fasts don't work very well for them. So this fat-based detox, where we are externally and internally saturating the body with the right kind of oils and fats, and no, people don't put on weight with it. In fact, their cholesterol balances, everything balances. So that we focus on that. It's called panchakarma.
Can I ask you what foods then are prescribed for that fat detox?
So for the fat detox, people are only eating it's a rice and lentil dish, khichdi, for about 2 weeks. But each day they're increasing the amount of clarified butter, cultured and clarified butter. So the Ayurvedic sages knew it's a short chain fatty acid, and the way it is described in Sanskrit is that the ghee molecules actually go in and out of cells, trapping the toxins and bringing it out and dumping it into GI tract. Plus, we know the butyrate, which is the active fatty acid in butter and ghee, is the preferred fuel for intestinal cells. It actually turns off cancer genes in the intestines. So we do ghee enemas. So if for colon cancer or ulcerative colitis, ghee enemas work really, really well because again, it turns off the cancer genes. So there's a lot of benefit from doing some of these practices. And then most of my patients, if they're not on psychiatric medications, they experience anywhere between 70 to 90% improvement in their overall health, mind and body health by month 4. And month 5 and 6, I reserve that to teach them the fundamentals of health creation, health maintenance and sustenance, so that they truly become independent of any medical industrial complex, including me. I mean, I'm available when people need me, but my philosophy, my intention when I started my practice was to not make it a revolving door. So that health education, how do you attend to yourself? What are some of the daily practices, seasonal practices that you can incorporate, and how to take care of yourself? And really use all of the marvels of modern medicine only for when you need it. There is a role for modern medicine. Surgeries, acute interventions, yes, only when you need. But prevention only happens with lifestyle and with how we live our life. So that's what we focus on. For those that are on psychiatric medications, when they're physiologically ready and they're psychologically ready, that's when I start off the taper, and I do the hyperbolic tapering, very, very slow taper. And different patients. I mean, what I've found with the tapering process is that when a person is truly feeling empowered, their taper process goes very smoothly. But if they're afraid, if they're feeling disempowered for whatever their story is, if it's a disempowering story, then they tend to struggle with the taper process. So I wait to get them out of that state of disempowerment where they feel that they're once again in charge. Because that, again, so that's where I do talk to them about, we create our own destiny. Our thoughts create our reality. So those kinds of conversations do come up. And I try to get people to begin to recognize how that is happening in their own lives. So many, when we pay attention with this framework that, okay, my thoughts are creating my reality, you'll be surprised how many little things actually happen. So.
Agree. Yeah. Where can people find you?
So my website is trinergyhealth.com. My office phone number is 262-955-6600. And on Instagram and social media, it's Trinergy Health. YouTube, I've actually documented a lot of patient testimonials on YouTube, so people can see exactly what the process is. And I started doing that one because I started in 2019 when I got fired from 2 positions that I had, because I was really afraid for my license, and I realized that I needed to create some sort of evidence base to show people if I get dragged to court. But then I realized that it was actually it was actually inspirational for other patients to see that somebody else can do it in my same condition, then I can also do it. So
this has been an enlightening conversation. I could record so many more podcasts in more depth on some of the specific content of today, and will in time. And so I hope that you can join me in the future, but I'm extremely,
I'd love to.
extremely grateful for your time. Dr. Aruna Nammi, I want to thank you for a radically genuine conversation.
Thank you, Roger. My pleasure. And I will say this, I've actually been more, I tend to, because I've been on other podcasts and I tend to rattle the information part, but your questions actually made me pause and slow down. And I've really enjoyed this because a different side of me came out. Otherwise, my main focus is educate that, hey, there's a better way that, I'm so focused on the education piece. But today, it was a radically genuine experience for me. Thank you for that.
Thank you.